The Woman Who Defied Death. First chapter. Maria Volkov never imagined that her quiet life as a village school teacher would transform her into one of the most feared names whispered among enemy forces. The year was 1943, and the war had already torn through her homeland like a merciless storm, leaving destruction in its wake. Her small village of Krasnoye sat nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, a place where children once played freely and farmers worked their fields without fear. Everything changed on a cold October morning when the enemy forces arrived. Maria was teaching her students about mathematics when the sound of heavy boots echoed through the wooden schoolhouse. The children's eyes widened with terror as uniformed soldiers burst through the door, their faces hard and emotionless. The commanding officer, a tall man with cruel eyes, announced that the village was now under military occupation. Within hours, the peaceful community was transformed into a place of fear and suffering. Families were forced from their homes, and anyone who showed resistance was publicly executed as an example to others. Maria watched helplessly as her neighbors, people she had known her entire life, were humiliated and brutalized by the occupying forces. The soldiers took whatever they wanted, treating the villagers like they were less than human. The breaking point came 3 weeks later when Maria witnessed something that would haunt her forever. Young Pavel, one of her brightest students, had tried to hide a small piece of bread for his sick mother. When the soldiers discovered this act of defiance, they dragged the 12-year-old boy into the village square. The commanding officer made an announcement that would echo in Maria's mind for years to come. Standing before the gathered villagers, the officer declared that anyone who helped the resistance or showed disobedience would face severe consequences. He then ordered his men to execute Pavel in front of everyone, including the boy's mother, who collapsed in anguish. Maria felt something die inside her that day, replaced by a burning determination that would reshape her destiny. That night, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She could no longer stand by and watch innocent people suffer while she did nothing. Using her knowledge of the local terrain and her connections with other teachers in nearby villages, she began gathering information about the enemy's movements and plans. Her position as a school teacher had always made her nearly invisible to the soldiers, who saw her as just another harmless civilian. Maria started small, passing messages between resistance groups and helping families escape to safer areas. She learned to read the soldiers' patterns, memorizing their schedules and identifying their weaknesses. Her gentle appearance and soft-spoken manner made her the perfect spy, as no one suspected the quiet teacher of harboring such dangerous intentions. As weeks turned into months, Maria's network grew stronger. She recruited other teachers, shopkeepers, and even some of the older students who wanted to fight back against the occupation. They developed coded systems for communication, using lesson plans and children's drawings to hide military intelligence. The enemy forces remained completely unaware that their most valuable secrets were being stolen by a woman they considered insignificant. Maria's activities didn't go unnoticed by the resistance leadership. Her ability to gather accurate information and coordinate complex operations impressed even the most experienced fighters. She proved herself time and again, successfully predicting enemy movements and helping her fellow resistance members avoid deadly traps. Her reputation began to spread beyond her immediate area, reaching the ears of both allies and enemies. The turning point in Maria's transformation from teacher to warrior came during a particularly brutal winter. Enemy forces had surrounded a group of resistance fighters, including Maria's own brother, in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. The situation seemed hopeless, with the fighters outnumbered and running low on ammunition. Military leaders from both sides were present, making it a high-stakes confrontation. Maria knew she couldn't simply watch her brother and his comrades die. Using her intimate knowledge of the factory's layout from her childhood adventures, she devised a daring rescue plan. Under cover of darkness, she managed to infiltrate the enemy position and signal the trapped fighters about a secret escape route she remembered from her youth. The operation was a complete success, with all resistance members escaping safely. However, this victory came at a terrible cost. One of the enemy soldiers had caught a glimpse of Maria during the rescue operation, though he couldn't identify her clearly in the darkness. The commanding officer was furious about the embarrassing defeat and began investigating everyone in the village with renewed suspicion. Maria realized that her cover was becoming increasingly dangerous, but she was already too deep into the resistance movement to turn back. The investigation intensified when enemy intelligence officers arrived from the capital city. These were not ordinary soldiers, but trained professionals whose job was to root out resistance activities. They began interrogating villagers with brutal efficiency, using torture and intimidation to extract information. Several of Maria's contacts were arrested, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone broke under pressure. Despite the growing danger, Maria continued her work with even greater determination. She understood that backing down now would mean certain death for many more innocent people. Her network had become crucial to the broader resistance movement, providing intelligence that saved countless lives and disrupted numerous enemy operations. She had evolved from a frightened teacher into a strategic mastermind whose decisions affected the course of the war itself. The enemy's frustration with the continuing resistance activities reached a boiling point when Maria's intelligence helped the resistance destroy a crucial supply convoy. The loss of weapons and medical supplies was devastating to the enemy forces, who had been counting on those resources for their upcoming offensive campaign. Military commanders realized they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than ordinary rebels. Unknown to Maria, enemy intelligence had begun piecing together clues about her identity. They didn't yet know her name, but they had identified her as a key figure in the resistance network. The investigation had narrowed down to a small group of suspects, and Maria was among them. The net was closing around her, but she remained focused on her mission to protect her people and drive out the occupying forces. As winter gave way to spring, tensions in the village reached their peak. Enemy patrols increased their frequency, and random searches became a daily occurrence. Maria had to be more careful than ever, knowing that a single mistake could expose not only herself, but also the dozens of people who depended on her leadership. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything she had learned about survival and warfare. The final straw came when enemy forces announced they would execute 10 villagers unless the resistance leader responsible for the recent sabotage operations surrendered. Maria watched as soldiers began selecting victims seemingly at random, including elderly people and young mothers who had never been involved in any resistance activities. She knew the time for hiding was over, and she would soon have to make the most difficult decision of her life. The hunt begins. Second chapter. The morning Maria woke up to find wanted posters bearing her face plastered throughout the village marked the beginning of her new life as a hunted woman. Someone had finally identified her, and the enemy had placed an enormous bounty on her head. The reward was so large that it could feed a family for years, making every person she encountered a potential threat. Her days as an invisible schoolteacher were over forever. The posters described her as an extremely dangerous terrorist responsible for numerous attacks against military installations. The enemy had inflated her crimes beyond recognition, but Maria understood this was psychological warfare designed to turn the population against her. They wanted to isolate her from potential supporters and make her feel completely alone in her fight against the occupation forces. Maria's first instinct was to flee immediately, but she quickly realized that running away would abandon the resistance network she had spent months building. Hundreds of people depended on the intelligence and coordination she provided, and her disappearance would leave them vulnerable to enemy retaliation. Despite the tremendous personal risk, she decided to continue operating while staying one step ahead of those hunting her. Living as a fugitive required Maria to develop entirely new survival skills. She could no longer sleep in the same place twice or follow predictable patterns in her movements. Every shadow could hide an enemy agent, and every friendly face might belong to someone tempted by the bounty money. She learned to communicate through dead drops and coded messages, never meeting anyone face to face unless absolutely necessary. The enemy response to her continued activities was swift and brutal. Military commanders brought in specialized hunting units, trained specifically to track down resistance leaders. These soldiers were different from the regular occupation forces, operating with sophisticated equipment and advanced tactics. They set up roadblocks, conducted house-to-house searches, and interrogated anyone who might have information about Maria's whereabouts. Despite the intense pressure, Maria managed to stay ahead of her pursuers through a combination of local knowledge and careful planning. She used the forest trails she had explored as a child, hiding in caves and abandoned buildings that only longtime residents knew existed. Her network of supporters, though smaller now due to fear of reprisals, continued providing crucial assistance by sharing information about enemy movements and safe places to rest. The psychological toll of constant danger began wearing on Maria. But she found strength in the knowledge that her work was making a real difference. Intelligence she gathered prevented several planned massacres of civilians, and her coordination efforts helped resistance fighters avoid numerous deadly traps. Each successful operation reminded her why she had chosen this dangerous path despite the personal cost. Enemy frustration with their inability to capture Maria led to increasingly desperate measures. They began targeting anyone suspected of helping her, arresting innocent people and holding them hostage until someone provided information about her location. This strategy backfired spectacularly, as the brutality against civilians only strengthened local support for the resistance and made people more determined to protect Maria from capture. The breakthrough Maria had been waiting for came when she intercepted communications about a high-level military meeting scheduled to take place in a nearby town. 3 enemy generals would be attending this gathering to plan a massive offensive campaign designed to crush the resistance movement once and for all. Maria realized this was an opportunity to strike a decisive blow against the enemy leadership. Planning an operation against such heavily protected targets required every skill Maria had developed during her time with the resistance. She spent weeks gathering intelligence about the meeting location, studying the security arrangements, and identifying potential weaknesses in the enemy's defenses. The mission would be incredibly dangerous, with almost no chance of escape, but the potential impact made the risk worthwhile. Maria's first target was General Heinrich Kruger, a ruthless commander known for his brutal treatment of prisoners and civilians. Kruger had earned a reputation as one of the enemy's most effective leaders, responsible for crushing several resistance cells in other regions. His presence at the meeting indicated that the enemy was taking the local resistance threat very seriously. The general stayed in a heavily fortified hotel in the center of town, surrounded by multiple layers of security. Maria spent days observing the building and its surroundings, noting patrol schedules and identifying entry points. She discovered that Kruger had a habit of taking evening walks in the hotel garden, always accompanied by the same 2 bodyguards who had grown complacent after months without incident. Maria's plan was simple but required perfect timing and nerves of steel. She would pose as a hotel maintenance worker, using forged documents and a stolen uniform to gain access to the building. During Kruger's evening walk, she would eliminate the bodyguards silently and then confront the general himself. The operation would have to be completed quickly and quietly to avoid alerting other security personnel. The night of the operation, Maria felt a strange calmness despite the enormous danger she faced. She had said goodbye to her old life months ago, and now she was completely focused on completing her mission. As she slipped through the hotel's service entrance, she thought about Pavel and all the other innocent victims whose deaths demanded justice. Everything went according to plan initially. Maria's disguise fooled the security guards, and she managed to position herself near the garden where Kruger would appear. When the general finally emerged with his escorts, she struck with the precision and speed that had made her legendary among resistance fighters. The first bodyguard fell without making a sound, followed quickly by his partner. General Kruger realized what was happening just as Maria stepped into the light. The fear in his eyes told her that he knew exactly who she was and what she represented. For the man who had terrorized so many innocent people, this moment of terror was a taste of his own medicine. Maria looked him directly in the eyes as she eliminated one of the enemy's most dangerous commanders. The successful elimination of General Kruger sent shockwaves through the enemy military hierarchy. News of his death spread quickly among both enemy forces and resistance fighters, dramatically boosting morale among those fighting against the occupation. Enemy soldiers began looking over their shoulders, knowing that their most senior leaders were no longer safe from retribution. However, Maria's victory came at a significant cost. Her involvement in Kruger's death was quickly discovered, and the bounty on her head was increased to an almost unimaginable amount. Enemy forces flooded the area with additional troops, and the manhunt intensified to levels that made her previous situation seem comfortable by comparison. Every moment outside of hiding became a potentially fatal risk. The enemy's response also included targeting anyone suspected of supporting Maria's operations. Mass arrests swept through several villages, and military tribunals sentenced dozens of people to death on charges of collaborating with terrorists. Maria watched helplessly as innocent people paid the price for her actions, adding another layer of emotional burden to her already difficult situation. Despite the increased pressure and personal guilt, Maria knew she couldn't stop now. Intelligence reports indicated that the remaining two generals were planning an even more brutal crackdown on civilian populations in response to Kruger's death. Thousands of innocent lives hung in the balance, and only she had the skills and inside knowledge necessary to prevent the upcoming massacre. General Viktor Petrov was scheduled to arrive within the week to take over Kruger's responsibilities and implement the new security measures. Unlike his predecessor, Petrov was known for his paranoia and excessive security precautions. Eliminating him would require an entirely different approach, one that pushed Maria's abilities to their absolute limits while operating under unprecedented enemy surveillance. The Final Stand. Third chapter. General Viktor Petrov arrived with an army of bodyguards and enough security measures to protect a head of state. The enemy had learned from Kruger's death and was taking no chances with their remaining commanders. Petrov traveled in armored vehicles, stayed in different locations each night, and changed his schedule constantly to avoid predictable patterns. Maria realized that eliminating him would require her most sophisticated operation yet. The challenge was made even more difficult by the fact that enemy forces had brought in tracking dogs and electronic surveillance equipment specifically designed to hunt her down. The forests and hiding places that had protected her for months were no longer safe refuges. Every movement had to be calculated perfectly, as even the smallest mistake could lead to immediate capture or death. Maria spent 2 weeks studying Petrov's security arrangements, looking for any weakness she could exploit. The general was scheduled to inspect a weapons depot on the outskirts of town, a facility that stored ammunition and explosives for the entire regional military operation. If she could infiltrate the depot during his visit, she might be able to eliminate both the general and destroy crucial enemy supplies simultaneously. The weapons depot was built like a fortress, with high walls, watchtowers, and multiple checkpoints that screened everyone entering or leaving the facility. However, Maria discovered that the depot relied on local workers for maintenance and cleaning services, people who were searched thoroughly but allowed regular access to sensitive areas. She began planning an infiltration that would exploit this apparent weakness in their security. Creating a convincing cover identity required Maria to eliminate one of the regular cleaning staff and assume her identity. This was perhaps the most difficult decision she had made during her entire resistance career, as it meant taking the life of an innocent person who was simply trying to survive under enemy occupation. The weight of this choice haunted her. But she understood that hundreds of other innocent lives depended on the mission's success. The morning of the operation, Maria disguised herself as the cleaning woman and presented forged documentation at the depot's main entrance. Her heart pounded as security guards examined her papers and conducted a thorough body search, but her preparation paid off when they allowed her to proceed to the interior of the facility. Once inside, she began moving toward the area where Petrov would conduct his inspection. General Petrov arrived at the depot exactly on schedule, accompanied by an enormous security detail that filled the normally quiet facility with armed soldiers. Maria watched from a concealed position as the general toured the ammunition storage areas, noting his movements and the positioning of his bodyguards. She would have only one opportunity to strike, and timing would be absolutely critical. The moment came when Petrov entered a storage room containing high explosives, temporarily separated from most of his security detail by the narrow doorway and safety protocols. Maria emerged from her hiding place and moved quickly toward the general's position, knowing she had perhaps 30 seconds before backup arrived. Everything she had learned about stealth and combat during her months as a fugitive came together in this crucial moment. Petrov recognized Maria instantly, despite her disguise, his eyes widening with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The general, who had built his reputation on ruthless efficiency, found himself face to face with the woman who had become a legend among both resistance fighters and enemy forces. His hand moved toward his weapon, but Maria was faster, ending his threat to innocent civilians forever. The explosion that followed was not part of Maria's original plan, but enemy forces had booby-trapped the storage room as a security measure. The blast that killed General Petrov also destroyed a significant portion of the weapons depot, eliminating tons of ammunition and explosives that would have been used against civilian targets. Maria barely escaped the facility alive, her clothing singed and her hearing damaged by the enormous detonation. News of Petrov's death and the depot's destruction spread like wildfire among resistance networks throughout the region. Enemy forces were thrown into chaos as they lost both a key commander and crucial military supplies. The psychological impact was even greater than the material losses, as enemy soldiers began to understand that none of their leaders were safe from retribution. The third and final general, Alexander Kozlov, was the most dangerous of the three enemy commanders. Unlike his predecessors, Kozlov was not only a skilled military tactician, but also an expert in counterintelligence and psychological warfare. He understood that Maria represented more than just a physical threat and began implementing strategies designed to break her spirit and turn the population against her. Kozlov's arrival marked the beginning of the most intense phase of Maria's war against the occupation forces. The general instituted collective punishment policies that held entire communities responsible for any resistance activities in their area. Mass executions and deportations became daily occurrences, creating enormous pressure on Maria to either surrender or cease her operations entirely. The emotional toll of watching innocent people suffer for her actions pushed Maria to her breaking point. She had eliminated 2 enemy generals and significantly damaged their military capabilities, but the cost in civilian lives was becoming unbearable. Kozlov's psychological warfare was working exactly as intended, forcing Maria to question whether her continued resistance was worth the price others were paying. Despite her growing despair, Maria received unexpected support from resistance cells in other regions who had been inspired by her actions. Word of her success against Kruger and Petrov had spread far beyond her local area, encouraging other fighters to increase their own operations against enemy forces. She realized that her fight had become symbolic of the broader struggle for freedom, and surrendering now would demoralize resistance movements everywhere. General Kozlov made his greatest mistake when he decided to use Maria's former students as bait to draw her into a trap. The general announced that he would execute one child from her old classroom each day until she surrendered, beginning with the youngest and most vulnerable students. This calculated cruelty was designed to exploit Maria's protective instincts and force her into making desperate decisions. The plan backfired spectacularly when it finally pushed Maria beyond any consideration for her own survival. She had begun her resistance career to protect children like Pavel, and she refused to let Kozlov murder her former students. All her accumulated skills, knowledge, and determination focused on a single objective that made everything else secondary. Maria's final operation against General Kozlov was her most audacious yet. Instead of trying to infiltrate his heavily defended headquarters, she decided to force him to come to her by threatening something he valued even more than his own life. Intelligence reports had revealed that Kozlov was obsessed with recovering sensitive documents that had been stolen from his office, documents that contained evidence of war crimes and could destroy his reputation. Using her network of contacts, Maria spread rumors that she possessed these documents and was planning to transmit them to international authorities. She let it be known that she would be at a specific location at a certain time, ostensibly to make the transmission, but actually to confront Kozlov himself. The general took the bait, unable to resist the opportunity to eliminate both Maria and the threat to his career. The final confrontation took place in the ruins of the old school where Maria had once taught mathematics to children who dreamed of peaceful futures. Kozlov arrived with his most elite soldiers, confident that his superior numbers and firepower would ensure victory. He had underestimated how much Maria had changed from the quiet teacher he expected to find, cowering in the rubble. The battle was intense but brief. Maria had prepared the school building with hidden explosives and defensive positions that gave her significant advantages despite being outnumbered. She used her intimate knowledge of the building's layout to outmaneuver Kozlov's forces, picking them off one by one until only the general himself remained. In the end, it came down to Maria and Kozlov facing each other in the same classroom where she had once tried to teach children about the beauty of learning and discovery. The general offered her money, safe passage, and even the freedom of her former students if she would agree to work for him instead of against him. His desperation was evident as he realized that his psychological warfare tactics had failed completely. Maria's response was to honor the memory of Pavel and all the other innocent victims by ensuring that Kozlov would never harm another child. The explosion that destroyed the old school building could be heard throughout the valley, marking the end of the most brutal phase of the enemy occupation. With all three generals eliminated, enemy forces lost their coordination and effectiveness, creating opportunities for larger resistance operations. The woman who had started as a village school teacher had become something entirely different through her ordeal. Maria emerged from the ruins of her old life, transformed into a symbol of resistance that would inspire others long after the war ended. Her story spread beyond the boundaries of her homeland, proving that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when fighting for justice and freedom. Though the bounty on her head remained in effect, enemy forces had learned to fear Maria more than they desired the reward money. She had demonstrated that no amount of security could protect those who chose to prey on innocent people. The three dead generals served as a warning that would influence enemy behavior for the remainder of the occupation. Maria's transformation from teacher to legend was complete, but the war was far from over. Her actions had created space for other resistance fighters to operate more effectively, and the momentum she had built would carry the freedom movement forward even if she didn't survive to see final victory. The quiet woman who had once taught children about numbers had rewritten the mathematics of war itself.